Behold, it's Natalia. Let's go find some monkeys, shall we? Would you say sex is like riding a bicycle? Nothing gets me going like Christmas and wigs. Let's check out this show.
I remember the first creature I beheld. He was a squirrel. His name was Kevin.
I heard you need a DNA sample.
I want to find light and joy in things that bring us together and unite us. And I think science is something that can unite us. Ow. God damn.
There's a world out there, a world that needs to be beheld.
Oh my goodness. I'm on. Oh, hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Natalia Reagan, and welcome to Survival of the Filthiest. Happy Darwin Day. I'm a biological anthropologist and comedian, and so Darwin Day is like a very special holiday to us anthropologists. And for years, I've been doing science communication for over 10 years now and teaching evolution, the theory of evolution by natural selection, written about by Darwin, is a big deal. And I always saw it as a fun challenge to reach the masses, right? Sometimes you got to think of your audience. Do you need puppets, sketch comedy, storytelling, spoken word, whatever works. But now, when we have a country that is waging a war on science, it is even more of a challenge. When we're seeing pages about women's health removed by the NIH website, when we're seeing the trans community removed from the State Department page about health and travel, when we have an anti vaxxer who single handedly caused a lethal measles outbreak in Samoa, leading the health department, when the H5N1 bird flu is kind of looming above us, it's problematic. It is very scary. We're also seeing roundups of undocumented workers who feed our country and have also contributed at least $97 billion in taxes in 2022 alone. Uh, we're looking at a big crisis ahead. And there's also now restrictions of funding that is going to folks with keywords that are not being looked at, not being considered for funding. And these words consider things like include words like women, disability, bias, status, trauma, Black, Hispanic communities, and things like gender diversity. And I want to point out, because I think this is very important to point out, that gender diversity and trans healthcare benefits us all. Excuse me, I'm getting so riled up. But I use the example that in 2022, a gender affirming care surgeon, a queer identifying gender affirming care surgeon, Dr. Blair Peters, finally counted, all the nerve fibers on the human clitoris. And when I interviewed them about why they did this, they said it was actually to build a better penis because of trans care. And that is an example of how trans care benefits us all. And furthermore, our country now wants to, the White House now is saying that there's only going to acknowledge sex rather than gender, and that sex is only male and female, no gray area, and it is what you are at conception. Which, if you know anything about basic biology, that at conception, basically every fetus is phenotypically female. So, all you men out there, all you conservative men, better embrace that woman inside because that's what you really are. And so that is why today on Darwin Day, I was so excited to get a good friend of mine and an amazing science communicator to agree to be on my show. She is well above our caliber. She is a evolutionary biologist. She started off, working, well, actually grew up in Alabama, so has been facing all sorts of challenges with those that might have religious ideology that don't particularly seem to meld with science to begin with. And she went on to become an expert in teaching science. And I have watched this woman take on a creationist in a New York bar in the most kind and compassionate way while eviscerating his argument. And he walked away with, no hard feelings and with a new outlook on life. And that to me is effective science communication. Her name is Dr. Amanda Townley. She's also the director of the National Center of Science Education. And I am thrilled to have this woman on. So please, a warm and hearty welcome for Dr. Amanda Townley. Hi.
Hi. Oh my gosh, what an incredible intro. And what a story that was. That was quite the experience that night in New York, I have to say. I'm so excited to be here with you today. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, and we've known each other, I would say, I don't know, 8 years now, 10 years?
It's been a long time.
And I feel like every time I'm with you, I not only learn something, but I just see the way that you educate folks, even in like the smallest little snippets. Like science is such a part of your day-to-day life and how you walk around the world. You are like a Darwin advocate just amongst us. So what a perfect guest for this particular day.
Well, thank you. You can see I have my Darwin Day celebration shirt on for all of my Southern friends and family. My All
Yes.
Y'all Evolved shirt. So,
Yeah, thank you for doing so because you're here, right? I've got
yeah,
my Scarface Darwin shirt that you can kind of see
love
in
it.
the mist and my little bowler hat. But I got to ask you, I want to know about your science journey because you grew up in Alabama,
Mhm.
and I can't imagine that science was on the forefront of your mind maybe growing up. How did this happen? What was your aha moment with science?
Wow, that's a great question, and I'm going to try to keep it as concise as possible. But some people know this, some people don't. But my story's a little deeper than that because yes, I grew up in rural Northeast Alabama. I grew up a naturalist, so I think I always related to Darwin even before I knew who he was because I was so fascinated. For people that don't know, Alabama is an incredibly beautiful state. It's one of the most biodiverse in the country. And I was turned loose on rural Northeast Alabama where there are waterfalls and caves and lakes and beautiful forests, old forests, and just was always in love with nature, grew up on a farm. And I was also a part of a Southern Baptist ministry family. And so I grew up in a literalist tradition in a young earth creationist church family and family at home. But honestly, the images that that may bring to people that are hearing that story would not align to the actual upbringing that I had because all of the women in my family were teachers. And the women in my family were the strength and the backbone of the family. So it wasn't one of those situations like what you see in the movies. I was the only girl of my generation. I was the baby and I could hang with the boys just as well as anybody else could. And nobody ever told me I couldn't or that I shouldn't. I mean, I know I probably gave my mother hives because she would put me in the little frilly dresses and the smocking and stuff. And I would be up a tree or in the lake or, out playing around with the cows on the farm. But I was always taught to ask questions, and that curiosity was fostered. And I don't know that in really pushing me to ask questions, they had any idea where that would lead to. But it was so fostered in everything that I did. And I think my aha moment, even though I didn't realize it till much later, came when I got to high school and I was in an advanced biology class, honors biology class. And the teacher at the time got to the chapters on evolution and said, okay, the next chapters in the book, are talking about evolution and things like that, but we're not going to cover that and skip to the next section. And me being taught to question, and of course, you look, at least back then, we looked at textbooks as being an authority in the classroom, right? And it's like, okay, they're teaching all this stuff to us. It's all in the book. There's all the questions. Here's the vocab. What? We're just going to skip this entire section of the book? And, being a good little, teenager, I read the whole part and was like, oh, there's got to be something spicy in here, right? For her not to talk about it. And I read it and I was like, um, what? Like, what is the problem? I mean, and I'm sitting there as a person of faith. I think I was in the church every time the doors were open. So Sunday, like multiple times, we would eat at church, go to church, church after church, GAs, RAs, Wednesday church, sports teams were church sponsored. I mean, it was very much
Wow.
part of my life.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute, what's the big deal about
Yeah.
this? So many of the things too were things that I had not seen the whole process, but it's like we have a farm. We pick which cows to breed for a reason, right? You do all of these things for a reason because we know that these things happen. And so I was like, okay, cool. I get all of this. It's not scary. I'm just going to go home and talk to everybody about it. And oh boy, was that fun. So, it was scary for them. They were terrified. And that really set me on a whoa, what's going on? Like, you tell me to ask questions. I'm asking questions. why are you afraid of this? Like, we actually do some of this for, artificial selection and breeding. Why are we afraid of this? And that's when those conversations started for the first time for me. And like many people, I think, out there, the experience leads you to a bit of a crisis. We talk about identity very frequently. We talk about our gender identities. We talk about our cultural identities and all these other things, but we rarely consider the fact that religiosity and a lot of traditions is also a part of identity. And so you're looking at an identity construct coming into direct head to head conflict where what I'm seeing, what I am, what the evidence tells me and what I'm being taught are not in alignment. They're butting heads. And at that time, I had nowhere to go. My teachers wouldn't talk about it. I didn't really have anybody who was interested in talking about evolution because they were all very scared about it. My trusted in groups, my worldview was challenged as a result of, this very simple, it seemed like, conversation. And it put me in a bit of a whirlwind. So, I continued in my love of science that, you can't just shut off that creativity, but it really pushed me to, start diving into other sources, pushed my desire and drive even more to do research and learn more and read about it and find out about it. So, fast forward many years later, and, I became a outdoor educator while I was when I finished my undergraduate because I love nature and it was right there in the backyard where I grew up playing in the
Oh, I
woods.
would have loved you to be my teacher. That would have been amazing. Anyways, go on.
We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of
Yeah.
fun. But big plug to Jacksonville State University and the Environmental Policy Office, Kids into Nature Camp. Because of them, I became a classroom teacher because I loved it so much. And so I continued my graduate studies while I was teaching, high school science in Alabama and in Georgia over the span of years and went to get my doctorate. And my major professor was saying, what are you interested in exploring? Because I had done all this scientific bench work. I was also in science education, so I'm in both fields. And I was like, I'm really not sure. I could do X, I could do Y. And then one day I'm having a conversation in the lab, and I mentioned that I never learned about evolution until I got to college. And my lab mates looked at me like I was suddenly growing like a third arm out of my forehead. And I was like, you know what? That's what I want to learn about. That's what I want to study. And I had been having those conversations with my family members for years and people in my community for years. And so I did that study and started looking at teachers and finding that, teachers, whether they've experienced conflict or not, are perceptive of the fact that there is a public controversy that surrounds this and other topics. And so they're almost on constant guard. So that's what I looked at. What are the factors that impact whether or not somebody accepts evolution? And then what are the lived experiences? I'm going to get inappropriate because it's survival of the filthiest.
Please
But
do.
I can't remember who made the quote, but there's an old quote that says, there are two key forms of entertainment in the South: storytelling and fornication, and both are relatively cheap and easy to procure. And that's because, in the great anthropological tradition, we are, in essence, as humans, we are storytellers. And so I didn't just want to look at the numbers, I wanted to hear the stories. Why do you feel the way that you do? What has led you to perceive this conflict? Where have you learned these things? Because they're all things that connected to my experience. So, my first aha moment would have been in high school. And then the second one came in realizing that, hey, there are things that we can do to combat, the misconceptions about evolution so that people of faith, people of different cultures, people of different backgrounds can learn about science and be scientifically literate. And also, there can be somebody out there for the people like me that had nowhere to go except for these polar extremes, when in reality, very few things are black or white. It's a giant gray spectrum. And most people are somewhere in the middle, just fighting to find out some kind of information or somebody they can relate to who understands and can speak to that experience without judgment, which is a big piece of the work that I do, is that radical empathy piece.
Yeah, and I think that's so incredibly important, like you said, with the
Mhm.
empathy of understanding, meeting people where they're at. Because I think a
Mhm.
lot of times it's hard to just, you kind of want to come at them where
Mhm.
you're at, and that's not gonna work. That's not gonna reach people. And
Right.
I just love that story because I do feel like I mean, how wild is it for you to be in a college classroom being like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know about this until, until I got
Graduate
here." That's
school.
graduates, which is
Doctoral level grad school telling them I never learned about evolution until I took a graduate course on evolutionary adaptations as a grad student.
that is
Even as a
bonkers.
biology major, it was not a
That's
required course in undergrad where I grew up.
so God. Okay, so and it's interesting because I went to the National Association of Biology Teachers. Thanks to
Mhm.
you, I was there. I got to give the keynote, which was one of the most supportive. Uh,
It's an amazing.
I just felt like very creative meeting. They really want to be
Yes.
better educators, like,
Yeah.
and everybody was so just kind to each other, and there was just a lot of good ideas. But
Mhm.
what one of the things that really struck me was what you were kind of saying was this idea of having to cloak their evolution teaching in religious, doctrine, really, to kind of be able to, kind of be the sugar to make the medicine go down.
Mhm.
Almost like we have to tell the story of evolution like a parable, like
Mhm.
Jesus did, like this idea of storytelling. And so my question to you is how do you best combat somebody or a demographic, a swath of the population really that has been taught for so long that evolution is, evil or
Mhm.
something that is not cannot be in alignment with religion.
And that's the thing. That goes back to this idea that there's a false dichotomy. A lot of times the perceptions on the scientist side of things is that if you don't accept evolution, you're just ignorant. If you walk into any conversation assuming somebody's ignorant, do you really think that's going to go well? I mean, if somebody's talking to me like I'm ignorant, I really don't want to engage, and I'm certainly not going to listen to what they say. But because we have some of that voice out there in very loud spaces, that's what religious people often assume about scientists is that all scientists are atheists and are out to prove that God doesn't exist, all these other things. So it's really a multi part question because there's a lot of missing pieces. First and foremost, if you teach evolution like the unifying theory that it is, woven through all of life sciences, by the time you get to an evolution unit in classroom teaching, it is so apparent and a piece of things that students are like, oh, wait, we were talking about evolution the whole time. Yes, because it's not this big scary thing. It is a very simple concept, a very important concept, and something that has to be here for any living thing to be able to thrive and survive through time. The other thing is we have got to fight for our elementary science teachers. We have to. The fact that there's so much focus on reading and math, which are tremendously important, but we're doing those things in longer time blocks, and we're sacrificing the study of social sciences, which prevents us from repeating historical mistakes, and we're taking away the time that we can spend on science, which is what fosters creativity. It fosters critical thinking. It helps students make sense of the world around them and helps them learn that failure and mistakes are not a bad thing. We need elementary science back in elementary science classrooms from pre-kindergarten all the way through. It is an absolute travesty that a lot of our students are getting 15 minutes a week, maybe a few days a week, where they're actually learning about science in school. But then they get to middle school and suddenly have a science class. By then, they're already checked out.
Yeah.
That curiosity has been tested right out the door, and they have been conditioned to believe that there's only one right answer, and that everything just has a simple response to it, which again feeds into another thing. We end up with a culture of people that if you can't give them the right answer in that moment and tell them that answer is never going to change, they don't trust it. Sound like distrust of science that we are
Yep.
facing right now. We have to do better with these things. We have to really engage people in conversations about the nature of science. It is,
Yes.
oh,
I always say that science is a verb, when I would
mhm,
teach my classes, and that it's not fixed. In fact, if it's fixed and static and doesn't change and doesn't seek to change, it's probably not very good science. And also just this idea of, I mean, the war on DEI and just having diversity in science and diverse voices, because if we have the same demographics doing the same science, we're going to get the same questions, the same outcomes, looking at the same problems, right? And so this is also a huge problem, I think, that we're facing with this sort of war on diversity, when all it is just being inclusive and having better, more robust science.
The whole thing to me, DEI to me really comes down to one word, and that's belonging. That is literally creating a culture across everything where everybody feels welcome to the table and not excluded. And like you said, without that diversity of perspectives, without representation from so many different places, spaces, belief systems, cultures, you know, colors, backgrounds, creeds, how boring things would be. How boring, how boring is life through a single lens? We talk about the depth of humanity comes from the variety of lenses that we have access to make sense of the world. And like, even with we talk about ways of knowing. I know you've heard me talk about ways of knowing before.
Yes.
It kind of ties back to Stephen Gould's non-overlapping magisteria, referring specifically, with matters of faith. The human condition is to make sense of the world around us and see where we fit. And we have to be respectful of the fact that there are so many different lenses through which we do that. The philosophical lens, that search for truth, a religious lens for a lot of people, where it's based on faith. It's literally belief in the absence of evidence in things that are outside of our understanding. And then, of course, the nature of science being that it is a physical explanation, events of a physical phenomenon in the world based on the physical measurable evidence that we can pull for that. And all of those things have great value to individuals because they help us feel less isolated, less alone, and less left in the darkness of the world that we want to understand and make sense of. And so, learning how to frame things, especially teaching students, teachers, even professors, teaching them how to frame things and separate those, because they all operate by different rules, could have a massive impact on public perceptions of science, a massive impact on trust for scientists, because so much of the conflict that we see, regardless of the topic, comes down to a basic misunderstanding of what science is and what science is not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I know that I taught at Eastern Kentucky University for a few years, and a lot of my students were very religious. And I always started the semester letting them know, I'm not here to tell you that your religion is not real, that your faith
Right.
is not based in something true.
Hmm.
I just want you to understand the science and
Yeah.
see how maybe they can coexist. And
Hmm.
that's totally fine. And that does not take away
Yeah.
from your faith. In fact, that could, like you talked about, if they're using artificial selection, if you live on a farm and you're using these tools
Mhm.
that we've see
Yeah.
in evolution, that it helps explain it, and I think it just makes the world so much richer if you are able to fuse the two together.
And here's the thing, and I have to add this caveat on behalf of the work that we do. People frequently say, "Well, NCSE is the leading anti-creationist organization in the world." Okay, we are not anti-creationist. We are in anti-inclusion of creationism or any religiosity in a science classroom. We are completely fine with whatever anybody wants to believe. Your faith is your choice. That's something that happens at home. The problem that we have and what we advocate for is protecting science classrooms from ideological interference that is not science. And so, with talking to students, one of the first things that I've always said in my work and even in working with teachers, a lot of people actually believe and have been taught that the whole purpose of science is to try to prove that God doesn't exist. And I know, and something as simple
Yeah,
as going back to those ways of knowing, right? Something as
yeah.
simple as, wait a minute, the rules of science say that we cannot use the metaphysical or the supernatural as explanations. That's what makes science science. It's based on physical evidence in a physical world. I refer back to the Francis Collins effect. Francis Collins is a devout man of faith. He is also an incredible scientist. I don't think you'd find a scientist on the planet that would argue that he is an incredible scientist and have anything to say about his being a person of faith. But it's a matter of him outright saying, I keep my science in the science realm and I still have my faith intact. But he doesn't try to say, write a paper and say, well, I think God did it. And while his faith might say, I am in awe of the world because I believe that a benevolent God created this world for us to be stewards in, he
Hmm.
also knows and understands the boundaries of science that say, whether you believe that or not as a person, there's not substantiated physical evidence of that to say it in science. It doesn't make it any less important, real, or impactful in his life. So I always say, I don't care what you believe. You know, science is not a matter of belief, it's accepting. We accept the evidence as the best possible explanation for an event in nature with our current understanding and technology, right? So it's ever changing. And that is the power of science. The fact that it is self correcting, the fact that we are so skeptical of things, the fact that we want to have challenges and that we want to have things come up, you know, with the big misconception about, well,
Yeah.
scientists don't agree with the theory of evolution. And it's like, scientists have looked and picked and prodded and tested. You know, if substantial evidence comes about, we will absolutely relook and rewrite, no matter what it is, no matter how long it's been out there.
Yeah. No, this is absolutely true. And I do think it's very important to remember that, critical thinking and being able to understand that things change and the power in saying even things like I don't know, which I
Right.
think is seen as weakness. I know that, as I
Mhm.
was teaching, my students would ask me amazing questions, brilliant questions. And I'd think about it. I'd be like, I don't know the answer, but you guess what? I'm going to write this down. I'm going to go on
Mhm.
Science Twitter because Science Twitter, which I should give a shout out because Amanda, you were amazing on Science Twitter.
Thanks.
May it rest in peace.
Science Blue
But
Sky?
yeah, Science Blue Sky. Actually, yeah, Science Blue Sky. Go find Amanda there and learn a bunch. But you could go on there and get the answer. But there is power in admitting that you don't know, because I feel
Yeah.
like we're going up against, because the difference between, I think,
Mhm.
science and religion, and oftentimes is science does or religion doesn't change. It has answers, and these are the answers, and they're not necessarily questioned. And
Right.
sometimes they are, but oftentimes they're not. Whereas science, it's understanding that it's meant to evolve over time as more information is gathered. And I think that will also help with critical thinking, seeing something online and not taking it as, the absolute truth, learning to Google something and try to figure out, is this
Mhm.
actual facts? Or are we being, the wool pulled over our eyes? I'm curious if you have a story or a thought about Darwin in particular, given that it's Darwin Day, that maybe has impacted you in your life. Maybe a mistake he made, or a decision, or a thing that he did. I just want to hear your thoughts.
So I know you can't see the titles on the bookshelf behind me, but this is my entire related to Darwin and evolution bookshelf. And there are so many different things, but I think probably the one that always resonated the most. So the thing that stuck out to me, and it's so cliche, but it is, but I am very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. Because having been in all of these spaces, you know, so often we glorify scientists or other figures as being kind of superhuman and super brilliant, and they just walked in, and Newton happened to be sitting under the tree and it popped him in the head, and magically he just blah, 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 blah,
Gravity.
and all the science came out. And it's like, no, in reality it's a process of sometimes misery and failure and self-denigration and pain, and then you're trying to share the things that you do and you get the rejections and all this. And I think the reason that resonates with me is not because I hate everybody and feel stupid and poorly today, but it's because of it's their humanity. It's that such a human moment with this great figure of scientific history. And then you realize, wait a minute, despite the challenges that he faced in his day, despite going up against policy and dogma that at that time was not popular, despite all of the different things that he faced, he continued to ask questions. He continued to fight. He continued the struggles through the ups and downs of exploration and, publication, and defending himself against, well, pretty much everybody at that time, both on a personal and a professional level. The things that he went through because he knew the impact of the work that he was putting out there, and he knew the conflict that it would bring about. And I think to us, it's a great lesson, especially right now, especially in modern times, that yes, it's a struggle. Yes, it's a fight, that we have to be able to persevere in the face of adversity and just keep fighting back. Accept the fact that we're going to have bad days, accept the fact that we're going to have hard times, accept the fact that there are forces that are working against so many things that we hold dear, and just hang on to a little bit of that, even if sometimes it's only a thread, to keep on fighting, because eventually we will overcome it.
1000%. Thank you. No, it's true. I feel like Darwin had imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like he stuff,
Who
like that's
doesn't
crazy.
have imposter syndrome?
Exactly. But I think honestly, yes, and that's the wild thing is we all think that, oh, he had it figured out. And one of
Right.
my favorite stories is even the when Darwin, and that's why I think right now we're in a time where it's very similar to the environment that Darwin was in terms of
Yeah.
being afraid to publish, afraid to come out to say these things because
Yeah.
of fear of being ostracized. And I feel like a lot of scientists now are kind of going into that, should I say the thing that's on my mind? And it was, Alfred Russel Wallace, who I call the fire under his ass. Alfred Russel
Yes.
Wallace being another researcher who came up with similar
Mhm.
findings with his research in Southeast Asia, wrote to Darwin and was like, "Hey, guy, I came up with some results that look like this." And Darwin realized, "Oh crap,
I'm about to get scooped.
I'm about to get scooped." And he's like, "Oh, this motherfucker's like, I'm not gonna let him do it, you know?" And he's like, I gotta publish. But we've all had those moments where you kind of, and I know
Yes.
that I have too, where I'm sit on something because I'm afraid. I don't feel my own power. I don't feel my own strength. I don't feel that I'm competent. And it's just, I think it's a great, like you said, an example about, there's no, and even if I do it and fail, it's
Mhm.
okay
Yeah.
because you tried and you'll do it again,
Mhm.
but just getting out there and doing it. And one of the things that you mentioned actually in the beginning that really spoke to me was just how much you loved being outdoors. Cause I was the same, a little covered in mud child, hated dresses, you know, Mud day was my favorite day at school. I loved catching bugs. My mom's from Kentucky, would go fossil hunting. But
Yeah.
I worry about children sometimes now. I don't have kids, but I do have friends that have children, and I know that a lot of them spend a lot of time on tablets and
Yeah.
phones and playing video games, which there's no harm in doing some of that. But what would you tell maybe parents or even teachers of younger children to really help inspire the create? Because that's another thing we don't hear a lot is science and creativity, because I
Mm.
think you brought up a good point. Science is creative. How would you tell them to maybe better get their kids inspired by science?
I think we overthink the inspired by science part a lot of the times, because science is wonder. And with little kids, they are born full of wonder. I mean, anybody that's been around a child has been asked 400,000 times, why? Why? What do you mean? Why? Right? And so it's a matter of not taking that away from them more than anything. I mean, I have 5 kids from 10 to 23. So
Overachiever, overachiever.
so some people may not know that, but it's a matter of modeling those things, going outside, even if it's just in your yard or a park in your community, or if you can get out to the woods, just going outside and asking questions. One of my earliest memories was going outside, and my grandmother would put strips of tape on my arm outside, like sticky side out,
Yeah.
and let me just go around and pick up stuff off the ground and stick it on there, and then we'd tell stories about it. We would talk about it.
What?
Yeah, and like she had these giant. It was really neat because she had these giant boards at her house up on the wall, and they were done like museum display boards, like what we would have in a fossil collection. And she would have all the shells and things like that she collected, and she actually made little handwritten labels. I still have these. They are an absolute precious part of my life. And so that was modeled for me to explore and find cool things. I must have probably cracked like 2 tons of little rocks in their driveway with a little hammer just to see if they had
Geodes.
sparkly. Yeah. Well, it wasn't
Yeah.
even a geode. It was like pea
Yeah.
gravel or something, right? It was the actual material of the driveway. And I'm out there just whacking it with a hammer. I'm like, there's pictures of this. I'm like 4 years old with a hammer as big as I am, whacking the crap out of it out in the driveway because I wanted to see what was in it. So it's not like you have to
Yeah.
go and spend all this money on science camp. You don't have to go and buy kits for science. Turn your kids out in the dang yard. Turn them loose and let them ask questions. Let them poke at stuff with a stick. I think that's where a lot of it, at least especially for biology and environmental science people, that's where it comes from. Go outside, lay in the yard, and look at the stars.
Oh.
I mean, there's so many things to be in awe of and be inspired by. It doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, hell, kids are like cats. You can buy the fanciest toys you want. All they want's the box.
This is true.
Let's
How
not
much joy
overcomplicate
the
it.
mate did you ever do the Maytag box? Like, turn the washing machine box into a
Yes.
playhouse? Because that was
Yes.
the
Mama's like
best,
a rocket.
the best. Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
the
yes.
floor is lava, we didn't even
Uh,
need a thing, just a bed and the floor is lava.
right.
No, I was obsessed with like lizards, like and
Mm.
any animal and,
Oh, yeah.
I probably yes, I mean, that was what my thing was, my mom we'd get a lot of alligator lizards in our house in Southern California, and she would just scream, "Natalia, we got another lizard," and I'd have to come and catch it and try to be friends with it, but realize just after getting bit a million times that this is probably
Uh,
not the right idea. But that's the wonder that I think,
yeah.
yes,
Those are
let's
the
l
things. Yeah. When people say, when did you know you wanted to be a scientist? And I was like, I was born all kids are born
Oh,
scientists, and I
yeah.
had the benefit of never having that really stomped on, I hate to say, or being put in a box with that. And I mean, there are people, people have different circumstances. I grew up in a very small town, but we were out in the country. We were on a farm. So I had a lot of space to roam free. And I know a lot of people don't have that privilege, but there are some amazing scientists, young scientists, scientists of color, people from all different backgrounds who are telling the stories of their passion about science and how they came into science from urban spaces where there are no parks, from communities where there were, other struggles or socioeconomic struggle. So there's somebody that looks, sounds, feels, has been through, has comes from, for everybody out there. And coming back to your original point earlier, that's why that diversity and belonging matters so much.
Absolutely, 'cause I feel like there's so many people who have become luminaries in science that are, from all different backgrounds that are like, "I did it despite the fact there was nobody like me." And now that they are out there as either a Black, Latino,
Yeah.
or, queer scientist,
Mhm.
they're now getting messages from folks being
Yeah.
like, "I had no idea that I could do this." And
Yeah.
that is why that matters more than,
Absolutely.
oh, so much out there. And again, like I to see any sort of attack on that does,
Oh man, it makes me
sadden my because
see.
yeah.
People get sad. I just get pissed off. I mean,
Yeah,
it's fuel for the fire for me.
exactly.
You've heard me say the term they used a long time ago was pot stir because that's the politically correct and very nice thing to say.
Yeah.
Um, the actual Southern term for that, and I'm going to turn my full South on, is shit stir. Um, because I stir things up, and I've been that way from the time I was a kid. That's always been a part of my personality. So much of things you do a lot of good things because you want to do good things. Some things you do out of spite for people that say you can't. And that's the situation. We have to, kind of find our hope in the fight and use these things as fuel for the fight and be louder and stronger and stomp our feet because there are a lot of us. There are a
Yes.
lot of us. And a quote I came across the other day that really stuck was that most incredible things are not done by incredible people at incredible times. They're done by regular people who come together and decide they want to fight. And that's really the only way that good things and change happen is when people stop disconnecting, stop isolating themselves, and start talking to each other, supporting each other, encouraging each other, fighting side by side against injustices, fighting side by side against, or for the values that they hold dear, and I think it's more important now than ever that we stand up for these things and that, we stand up for who we are as well as the work that we do because it is critical to our society.
No, absolutely. And I want to ask you because you're such an amazing science communicator and you do such a great job dispelling all sorts of myths. But what are some favorite maybe methods of science communication that you would encourage? Maybe somebody who's like a regular person, like you said, that might be like, I don't feel comfortable doing a podcast or this, but are there any suggestions you have for folks to get involved that might
Mhm.
not know how?
Oh wow. I mean, I'm kind of an always on science communicator, very much to the chagrin of my children. Um, they're lesson in pretty much everything. I really think that the most impactful science communication happens in the everyday interactions that you have with people in your family, people in your community. It's not about, hey, let's go jump on a platform and look up how many people are anti this and go jump all over them. Because again, it comes back to radical empathy. A lot of change starts at the grassroots level. That's where NCSE started. That's where we do our work now. Yes, we do a lot of things nationally, but we go to the communities where we are needed. We go to the places where these bills are coming up or where districts are doing things to discredit science in the classroom. We go to the teachers that need us the most, because those conversations in your own backyard are sometimes the ones that are the absolute most important conversations, because there's so much distrust. There can be so much distrust and so much confusion and so much misinformation and intentional disinformation when it comes to a lot of these topics as well. So I always say, start at home. Start really with just listening. If you're one of those people that's in your community, for example, I still live in the South. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people around me, voted for this proposition, or they feel this way, or they did that. Okay, why? Why did they do that? Is it because they're an asshole? Is it because they're ignorant? Is it because of X? Because of Y? Quit making assumptions and go find out. Go
Mhm.
talk to people. Learn their reasoning. The most powerful piece of my work was not the statistics that said, oh, teaching the nature of science helps people accept evolution. The most important part of my work was the stories that these teachers were telling about things like, why don't you teach evolution? Well, we assume, well, they're religious and they just don't like it. But that religious teacher says, because of my evangelical literalism, if I lead my students to question their faith, then I'm responsible for them going to hell.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when we're on the outside looking in, exactly. When you're on the outside
Yeah.
looking in, things seem so simple. Well, if teachers don't like science, they shouldn't be science teachers. Or, well, if you don't accept evolution, you must be ignorant. You must not know about it. Also wrong. If you give people a test, a content knowledge test on evolution, and you also give them a measures of acceptance test, there is almost no correlation between the amount of knowledge a person has and whether or not they accept. It is extra rational relationship, because there are plenty of people who can make a 100% on an evolution test and will still tell you they don't believe in evolution. And there are also people who are full bore, yes, evolution, go Darwin, Chuck E. D, let's go. And you give them a test and they make a 30 on it. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
But yet, for generations, we've come to this problem as, if you don't know, you're just ignorant. Let me just vomit all this evidence at you, and you're going to hear it, and you're going to magically be accepting of evolution, and everything's going to be great and wonderful. No. If you want people to listen to you, if you want to be a strong science communicator, practice radical empathy. That literally means being empathetic and willing to listen, even when it is painfully opposite to how you feel and
Yeah.
your understanding and your experience. Because if you want to seek to be understood, you have to first seek to understand and meet people where they are and be willing to have that dialogue. Otherwise, everything just completely shuts down.
Yeah. It's those uncomfortable conversations that, even when we talk about race or even queer identities, and talking to friends and, because there are points where you're like, I don't want to talk to family
Right.
members, or you want to cut off friends. And
Yeah.
before you do that, maybe have some of those uncomfortable conversations where you call out this behavior, try
Yeah.
to understand it, try to change them, because like you said, they're more likely to listen to someone, if they look like me and come from a similar background, they're more likely to listen to me, which is unfortunate, rather than somebody that is a person of color or, queer identifying. But just having those conversations, as
Right.
uncomfortable as they are, they're probably far more uncomfortable from the person on the receiving end of whatever discrimination,
Right.
and so science equally deserves that fair shake, I think.
It does. And I will caveat that by literally saying there comes a point in time, don't feed the trolls.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to move away from the extremes. So if you think about it, we'll go to the bell curve. We'll get super scientific here.
Yeah.
there's a small portion of people at either extreme, but a majority lies in the middle, right? And so when you're trying to target these conversations, when you're trying to impact policy, when you're trying to reach middle ground, when you're trying to help people understand something that they may be deathly afraid of learning about, right? Or they may have negative experiences where they've tried to ask questions and been treated like garbage, or you may have had negative experiences with people of that group and you've been treated like garbage. We don't focus on the people at the far ends. We let the trolls on either side of the aisle because, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. We leave the trolls on either side of the aisle and we focus in the middle and we maintain our calmness. But you do have to have that understanding inside yourself of knowing when it's time to cut off and just stop. Know your mental health, know your capacity, know when you start feeling riled up, that's when you start getting to that point where things aren't going to progress. So sometimes your science communication may be a 5-minute conversation where somebody starts talking about their experience or their fear or what they've been told about a subject. And that's all you can handle in that moment. You don't have to be like, well, I'm going to push through and get them to agree with me. Probably not, but you're at least listening. And when you listen, you're able to inform your approach based on different perspectives from your own. I tell people frequently that the day that I celebrated doing the right thing in terms of the work and the research and that I had made the right decision is when I simultaneously pissed off the Discovery Institute and Jerry Coyne. So there was one day.
Go on.
Yeah, there was one day many years ago where both of them made nastygram, like what the hell kind of blog post about the work that I was doing. And I was like, mwah, middle has been found. I am now taking off both ends. So now we're in the sweet spot.
Yeah. No, and that's true. I mean, I sometimes engage. I get trolls coming in every so often, especially post-election. A lot of anti-vaxxers kind of slipped in. Some, and I listen. People say, "Oh, just block them," and I will eventually if they get inappropriate, because oftentimes it does weirdly get like they'll say some inappropriate science stuff or incorrect science stuff, and then also inappropriate sexual stuff, and I'm just
I
like, okay,
never.
this is where the block happens. But
Yeah,
up until that point, I'm listening. I'm taking notes. Like these are,
right.
and I would tell them, thank you for the data points. And I don't think they understood, but also like I would like to know how where they're ingesting their information.
Right.
Importantly, where are they getting it from? Because that helps me understand. That actually was a big reason why I wanted to do this show, is because I feel like there are tons of streaming shows and things of that sort that have those on the anti-science take, but don't maybe have as many, you know,
Right.
scientists coming on and
Absolutely.
talking about. And the radical empathy, I think, it's a tough one, but it's so important. And I love that you do it, and you do it so well, because I know you don't take any shit. I see it. You don't. You are because I've seen you do it a couple times, and I'm just like, I watch kind of dumbfounded, mouth agape, just like, how does she do it? Because you've got the Southern charm. You say it with a smile, but you are just eviscerating an argument, but also listening, and that's, I think, it's a skill, but I think everybody can take notes and learn how to just be better at
Mhm.
listening at the side that we're trying to reach, because how else are we going to,
Agreed.
reach
There's
people?
there's a great Southernism that says there's a reason why you have two ears and one mouth. You should listen twice as much as you're talking.
I'll be silent on that one. It's perfect though. But that's what we need to do. It's easy to run our mouth all day long,
Right.
and at a certain point, I want to know what other people are thinking. And uh, so this is more of a broader question of like, are there any? And we talked about some of these scientific, sort of myths that are going around, or misconceptions. Are there any right now that are just getting you in the craw, like you really wanna get out there, and feel free. This is your moment to just you can get filthy with it too. I don't care. This is survival of the filthiest here,
Oh,
you know?
man, we so need like 3 extra shows to cover all the misconceptions that keep me riled up. You
Peter,
know,
put them on the schedule.
yeah, let's go ahead and book an entire series of things that tick off Amanda Townley in misinformation, misconceptions, and disinformation related to science. That's a whole series. But to just keep it simple, This whole idea that science is this great conspiracy, I think can really captures all of them because there's so many misconceptions that are historical surrounding the races, and the fact that race is even a thing is not even a scientific concept. With gender identities and identity versus biological sex versus, I mean, what was it, small cells and large cells, and I'm like, everybody's female for what you mentioned that in the offset,
Yeah.
like this conceptual misunderstanding that what happens is it all gets amplified, and it gets amplified in social media, and it gets amplified in all these mediums that try to make things look scientific. Um, but it all comes back to this idea that somehow we're all colluding and working together. Climate change must be a myth and scientists are just trying to mislead people. Evolution isn't real, scientists know it's not real, but they continue to lie. And I'm like, oh man, I've tried to get four scientists to go to lunch together and we can't even agree on where to eat.
Ah!
But you want 98, well, you want to tell me that 98% of scientists, are misleading people about this scientific topic or that topic. But I think it all comes down, how do we address that comes down to, we have to teach people what science is. We have to quit assuming that people just get it, because it's not a search for truth. Let's please stop saying, well, science is truth. No, it's not. It is scientific theory, it is scientific fact, but we don't deal in truth. We are not philosophers, we don't deal in truths. This whole idea, well, scientists are unbiased, and no,
No.
no, we are emotional and we are nerdy and we are sporty and we are, all the different range of things that any other human being is. So let's quit putting scientists on a pedestal for being unbiased and objective, and actually say what it is. We work our butts off to identify where our biases, emotions, and things like that come into play. And then we throw our work to the wolves to rip it apart and make sure that we're not doing that. And then we keep doing it over and over and over again on purpose to make sure that the stuff that gets out there that is then, scrutinized by the rest of the scientific community, who has to read it and be like, okay, that makes sense, because we're all super easy about reading things and not being like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. You know, I was joking with somebody today. There's petty, there's Southern petty. Well, there's also scientist petty.
Oh, so
Like,
petty. So
like,
petty.
like we are not out here just trying to confirm everybody's stuff because it's cool and it's fun. Like, our job is to ask those questions and try to pick things apart. Making sure things are falsifiable and testable and so forth and so on. So all of those different pieces. But I guess to me, it all comes back to the nature of science and making sure people know what science is and what science is not, because that is the foundation of so many things. And getting it that little piece that is so not controversial, it's
Right.
divorced from any of these other concepts, but yet teaching those things explicitly and having those conversations explicitly is like the gateway drug that opens the door to understand the context of everything else that we know, do, or study in the sciences. And it pulls away so much of the argument. I mean, I genuinely believe that if we were accurately and adequately addressing the nature and process of science, the history and philosophy of science, from little kids all the way through professors, because some professors would still argue some of those points, even though we know them to be, boundaries of science, that so much of this other stuff would be, non-existent, because those are the foundational blocks upon which so many other misconceptions come from.
Yes. Especially, I feel like coming out of COVID and perhaps
Oh,
facing. Yeah, I know that was the one takeaway from COVID was the failure of understanding how science works.
hmm,
That was my biggest. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, from the top. I mean, from Trump
Mhm.
talking about injecting our bodies with Windex, I mean, it was just like, duh. And understanding that, oh, they don't know what they're talking about because things are changing. It's like, yes. And I was living in New York City when COVID started.
I-
And by the way, Amanda, you and I were running around New York City. I believe it was like March 1st.
Yeah, it was like 2 weeks before the world shut down. Yeah.
Yeah. we were running around New York City, taking the train, running around in the rain. It was so
Taking the
much
train, according to my pedometer, we walked 11 miles,
fun.
4 hours that night. There was no train involved.
Okay, you're right, you're right. We were yeah, we tripped the light fence, but that was a fun night. We
That
had
was
no
great.
idea. We had no idea.
Yeah.
We were so young, and we but, like, that wasn't that such a huge takeaway, and I remember I was
Yeah.
teaching at, Lehman College in the Bronx,
Mhm.
and I was teaching in person. It was a 5-hour class on Fridays. It was 3 hours of lecture, 2 hours of lab, and I would take the one way to get there was an hour and 45 minutes on the train in rush hour, you know? And
Mhm.
my students knew. My students were so smart. They absolutely knew something was going on, and they got it, you know? And I was so proud of them. You know, I feel like that New York City education really, hit home, and I remember doing an emergency emerging disease lecture on February 28th, 2020,
Mhm.
and one of the big things was that science will change. It's not fixed.
Yeah.
So even as we get more data, and I wish, that was something, and I hope that is something, and I want to ask you, based on everything you're saying, and the fact that you are the director of the National Center of Science Education, I was so excited when that happened. I was like, oh goodness, good things are
Me
ahead.
too.
Good thing, yes, because you are just beyond deserving. I wanna know what the National Center of Science Education is really focusing on. Are there any things going on in specific states that you're really working to, change or educate, or yeah, give me the scoop, the skinny.
So this is a really critical year, and I don't know if people realize this, but this is the 100th anniversary of the Scopes monkey trial. That was
Mhm.
years ago this year. It's also the 20th anniversary of Kitzmiller versus Dover, which is the trial that happened in 2005 that established that intelligent design is not allowed in science classrooms. And so, really leading up to, the pandemic shutdown and all of that, we were making really good progress with things like evolution education. We had added climate change education and the nature of science to the list of things that we were fighting for in our K-12 classrooms and of course, in legislation. But I can tell you this year is gearing up to be very difficult because of the different things that have gone on in the last 5 years, because of the climate politically right now. We are starting to see a resurgence of these things already. And we're only a few weeks into the filing of legislative bills. And so we've got an intelligent design bill in North Dakota. We have a House bill and a state bill in Ohio that is set to impact higher education. But we're already seeing trickle down of those higher education bans on controversial topics leaking into the K-12 education spaces because that's where our teachers are trained. That's the mediums by which a lot of teachers get professional development. We have a number of different, I mean, people have been following what's been going on in Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana with religiosity coming into schools in new ways. We've had districts that have tried to cut specifically evolution and climate change out of their textbooks that they're using. We've got Florida as a state trying to go back and have the textbooks pull out their references to climate and other topics. So we're really seeing an look, you can it's really horrifying. You can go to our website at ncsc.ngo and actually follow that news because our catalyzing action program, the absolutely infamous and untenable Glenn Branch, monitors those airwaves and is keeping his finger and keeping our finger on the pulse of all of these different bills that are being introduced. The problem is the climate as it is right now. In the past, those bills have actually died in committee, and now we're not so sure that that's going to happen. And so
Wow.
that is very difficult. So we're looking at rapid response teams. We're amping up our one-on-one time with teachers. We're going to Alabama, to Georgia, to Florida, to North Dakota, to California, New York, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Texas. We are going to all 48 states in the next 4 years. Okay. And we do that because we're supported by people who love science and want to protect science education. I would be remiss to say we're not federally funded. We are 100% funded by people who genuinely love science, who want to see a scientifically literate community, and who enable us to do these things. And this is going to be one hell of a year, Natalia. We don't know if Kitzmiller will stand if they go to the Supreme Court, because we see what happened with Roe, right? We
Yep.
don't know what's going to happen in the courts, so we don't have the benefit of that safety and security that we have felt previously. And I personally, take it as a personal challenge and a challenge for our organization that, here we are 100 years later, we should be in a completely different realm of thinking. I shouldn't have this job. This organization should not have the mission that it has to ensure that all students in the United States in K-12 education get an accurate science education and are scientifically literate to be able to problem solve and fix the issues with our society. And yet here we are, and now we're facing challenges in a way that we haven't seen in a generation.
Yeah. Well, just like you said, if we were getting more than 15 minutes, whatever, a day talking about social science or social studies, we might actually have an idea of how not to repeat history, like we seem to be doing. And that's terrifying. And just if you would like to say a few words about the Kitzmiller trial and just for the folks at home that might not be aware of it and how it's very important about keeping science classes and not religious classes.
No, absolutely. And so in Kitzmiller versus Dover, what we were essentially looking at was, I mean, there was a long line of cases that preceded that targeted different little pieces. What was special with Kitzmiller, at least for me, is the fact that at that point in time, the creationism movement had really been shut down. It had already been established that you can't teach overt creationism in the classroom. And so organizations banded together, like the Discovery Institute, to literally create materials and approaches that felt scientific, that looked scientific for the classroom, to then introduce this new version, kind of a softer scientific version or scientific masquerading version of creationism in the classroom. And the critical point, and I wish I could remember the exact quote, because if you want some really good reading, you need to read Eric Rothschild's approach to um, interviewing people, to the deposition that was happening. There are whole whole articles that are written about that, because they were talking about how politely eviscerating he was with his cross examinations. But also the fact that it really did put the locker on intelligent design, because it was really starting to seep in everywhere. We were seeing it in bills and legislation to try to get things in other states as well. And it was the point where they said, nice try, also creationism, no more. And so it shut it down. And so the fact that we're seeing those things come back, in so many different states, and people are like, well, it always happens in these states and these states. It's not the usual players. It's a lot of new players as well. And it's very concerning.
Yeah, and are you seeing more younger folks actually getting involved in this sort of religious masquerading as science or vice versa? Are you seeing it not just the old guard, but also younger generations as well?
I mean, when you compare the people that would have been in legislative positions, in the 90s and 2000s, yes, some are still around, but a lot of it is younger generation, or the next generation of senators and things like that, or state board of education people in some of our state cases. So it is an intergenerational thing. I mean, again, Scopes was 100 years ago. And so we've been fighting these same battles in just slightly different, iterations for over 100 years. And now, in some ways, it feels like we're back to square one. And again, going back to that message of hope, it's very easy to internalize those things and become discouraged. But I choose to use those things as fuel for the fire, to make
Yes.
sure that we're fighting as hard as we can, that we're mobilizing people. And that's why I encourage people, sign up for our newsletter. If you want to know what's going on, sign up. We're not going to charge you money to sign up for a newsletter. If you're able to donate, if you want to donate, even if it's $1, that's $1 more than what we had yesterday. And we are very, very busy. Come and check us out.
Please donate.
Yeah, look at our resources for teachers. They are free. Everything that we do for and with teachers is free of charge to those teachers. We don't ever charge them a dime. We even go to them in their neighborhoods. And so, everything that we do is to try to fight back for science education to make sure that our students are ready for the problems that we don't even know exist yet.
It's one of those things where it is a very foreboding time, you know what I mean? When I think of a generation of students that does not have a basic idea of
Mm,
evolution and just
yeah,
a scientific understanding of how the world works.
right.
Uh, and please, when if you have the opportunity, if you have the means, donate to NCSE.
Hmm.
Yeah, and absolutely follow the struggle. And are there any suggestions you have about in terms of like how? I mean, aside from talking to people individually, but like
Hmm.
how maybe getting involved in any sort of protests or boycotts or just calling, legislators, anything like that, would you
Run
suggest?
for office. Kick them. No, I'm serious. I am done with just protesting. I am done with just saying that I'm not happy with this. Run for office. If you are capable, run for office. Kick the people out of office that are doing things that are literally securing the failure of our species. Run for office. We need things happening at a policy level as much as we do at the grassroots level.
Absolutely. Can we say Amanda Townley for Dr. Amanda Townley for president? May I please? May I please?
Go for it. Go
I
ahead.
I absolutely would. You're not watering our plants don't need electrolytes. Uh
Oh, I watched that
oh,
the other day. Oh,
oh,
painful, painful.
it hits home in such a way that I wish it did not. Oh my god, this I could talk to you. And actually, by the way, Peter, when we made a joke about doing a series of debunking bad science misconceptions. He was like, "I'm in. I make time for it."
Yes,
I
yeah,
would love to just sit down with you and hear because you the way you take it on, like I said, is so tactful, but also, like I said, it's like a sharp knife. You don't even know you're getting cut, and you're
yeah.
like, "Oh, I'm bleeding." Ah!
What is the phrase? And I can't remember who said it, and I hope it's not something awful, but it's like tact is the ability to tell somebody to go to hell in such a way that they anticipate the journey.
That is brilliant, but also so spot on.
Mm,
And they're asking for more. They're like, "Give me
yeah,
more. Can I give you another myth to debunk?" Yeah, show me. Don't threaten
love.
me with a good time. You kind of have covered this multiple times, but if you have any parting words about just, I'm trying to think of. God, there's so much I want to ask you, but also and I want to respect your time
Mm,
because it's your Darwin Day. You've got
it
stuff
is
to do.
Darwin Day. Yes.
Is yeah. Do you have any way of celebrating? By the way, are you gonna? I mean, aside from of course this lovely show.
Yes. So the National Center for Science Education and the National Association of Biology Teachers are also doing a Darwin Day event today. So that's later tonight. And it is in partnership with March Mammal Madness, this little wild animal
Yes.
I've heard about.
Oh
So
yeah.
we're doing that. And then, I like to read, talk about worm poop, barnacles, finches, all the cool stuff. Usually weird my kids out with odd stories that they never signed up to hear. Um, just so you know,
I
my oldest child became a math major because of all the science he got when he was growing up.
I love. Was that his act of rebellion?
Yeah, I think his act of rebellion was theoretical math. Yeah.
Oh, that's hot. That look at him. You just inspire. I mean, I need to take lessons. This is. I mean, you got this market cornered of how to just smarten up the world. But I do you have a favorite animal?
Oh. Hmm. I can always talk myself into a lot of different animals. I think my favorite domestic animal, I'm definitely a cat person. Um, and probably pangolins.
Wonderful creatures.
Yes.
Such little weirdos. Oh my
Beautiful
goodness.
armor.
Oh yeah,
Mag-
yeah, like that. That's what we need right now. We need to be pangolins, so we
yes.
can
Well, I'm
weather the
Southern.
trolls.
Yeah, I'm Southern. I can't be a pangolin, but I can be an armadillo. And down here we call them up armored possums.
Oh, that's so good. I love them. Just don't make out with them because sometimes you can get leprosy, but only from
Oh,
certain
yeah.
species.
No,
Yeah,
no.
don't do that. Yeah, yeah, I love
Don't
me. And
molest
they
the wildlife.
no, and they also have ridiculously large baloney ponies, a lot of
Yes, that's
armadillos.
true.
Armadillos, as I like to
See,
call
look,
them.
we brought this full circle back to the
We re
filthiest
we did. And yes,
scale.
and I as your last question,
Mhm.
I'm gonna well, second to last because I will ask a hopeful question, but the second to last question is, what is the filthiest thing you've done for science or science done for you?
Filthiest thing I've done for science. I mean, other than dig students out of poop-filled oyster beds in the salt marsh because they wore the wrong shoes. And so there was that.
That's
I
filthy.
mean, but that's really not
It's a
that
shitty
filthy. I
time.
mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah, it's but I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I'll have to get back to you on that one. But that's the one
That's
that
a
comes to mind most recently.
That's great. We have a whole series apparently ahead of us. And
Woo!
lastly, hope. What
Yeah.
do you have a parting phrase of hope for you or for us, for the crew, for the world?
Fight back with love. I mean, that's
Mm,
the thing. As so much that's being done is tied to hate and tied to division and things that seek to divide us further and further and further. And you have to fight back with love. I know it sounds completely crazy, and sometimes you just want to strangle people, but you
yes.
know, we have the reason this has happened is because we haven't been listening to each other. We haven't been empathizing with each other, and we've allowed forces outside of ourselves to divide us in so many different ways. And so, I am hopeful that even individual action can start mending some of those things so that we can survive these attacks and survive these things that are happening and come back from them one day somehow.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think that's a great point because I again about listening and the radical empathy is such a wonderful takeaway. It's
Thank you.
beautiful. I love it. I'm just gonna real quickly look and see if we have any burning questions, but I think
Okay.
this was an I don't know, does anyone have let's see. Sorry, I was supposed to put in the chat at the very beginning of the show that I would have to focus on our conversation first and then
Ah,
take questions later, but I don't know if anyone most people have just been saying wonderful things about you because you're a phenomenal human.
yeah.
And I'm so happy that I had you on. Thank you for being our very first guest.
Woo!
Darwin Day, baby. Yes. Oh my God. Where's
Just remember, all y'all evolved.
all y'all evolved? And on Valentine's Day, Darwin, where's Darwin's little tiny hat? Oh no, did we lose his tiny hat? But he would naturally select you. By the way, you would appreciate this, Amanda. This is my Charles Darwin in a bathroom puppet.
I love it.
Um, but this, I originally bought this on Amazon. It's a Noah puppet. I repurposed it.
I mean, the
I
beard,
mean,
things,
they both loved animals, so
potato,
hey,
potato,
how would you say?
potato, potato.
Potato. Exactly. Yeah, this poor Darwin's seen some better days. Anyways, this has been an absolute joy.
Yeah.
Please come back soon.
Anytime.
And yeah, and folks, if you want to help
Yeah.
keep science in the classrooms, please
Yes.
donate to the National Center of Science Education. Please follow. Where can folks find you,
So we
Amanda?
are we are everywhere. If you just put in National Center for Science Education, we're on TikTok, we're on Blue Sky. We're still semi on Twitter just because there's a lot of work to be done in that space.
I got it.
Facebook, Instagram, we're everywhere. We have our website at ncse.ngo. If you don't want to hunt us down, you can go to that and sign up for our newsletter, and we'll just send you stuff as it comes up, keep you abreast of all of the different things that are going on and all the places where we are fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. And if you enjoyed this show, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to help produce the show in the future, you can sign up on my Patreon. You can also just be a free member and just hear all the weird stuff that's going on in my life. Fighting the good fight, hanging out with Amanda. Amanda and I need to get together and
Uh,
yeah, trip the light fantastic again in New York or Savannah. So
Indeed.
but thank you so much. And
And
yeah, until next time, this is Survival of the Filthiest. And I'm gonna give a shout out to my Patreon patrons because you made this possible. In a moment, I think a thing's gonna come on screen. This is where I'm like, I don't okay. Okay.
love
Oh no, I have to say their names. Hold on. Daniel Wynn, Claude Allen, Tom Skullbeard, Tori Yates Orr, Redding Maley, Dana Logan, Michael Z. Weinstock, David Leitner, James Hudspeth, it's going fast, Anthony Zana, Tom Berman, Jen Beverstock, Scott Froschauer, JSB, Jeff Cohen, Andrea Bloom, and Jonathan Marks. Go John Marks, who's retiring this year.
love it.
Yes. Yay. Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
is
This has been amazing as
yeah.
always.
Oh my God, the best. Peter, do I have to do anything? This is where I'm awkward and I think I'm still streaming, but I don't know if I have to. Am I done? Goodbye.
Bye.